Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Video Mail for the week of January 2nd, 2012. 2012, what? Oh my God, it's the end of the world. I'm just kidding. Welcome, Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you for being here on the site. Thank you for supporting the site. I'm really appreciative to have you all here. Thank you. Thank you. It's just been really great fun, and I'm excited to do it in the new year. Hope you had a great holiday break and back to work and excited about animation in 2012. This is going to be great. Let's make it great together. What do you say? Deal, deal. The Ask Video Mail, don't forget, is your chance to get your question in character animation or performance answered in a video just like this one. But I need your question if I'm going to answer it, so please send your Ask Video Mail questions to webmaster@kennyroy.com. I answer all the questions I hope will help the most people. There's no such thing as a stupid question, and of course it's the best way to get the most value out of your subscription here on the site. Tell your friends it's a great New Year's resolution to get more training and to further your education in animation or otherwise. If you have any friends that are animators and they haven't heard of the site, I encourage you to tell them to give it a whirl. There's no better way to stay current in animation than to be part of something like this where you get that weekly content coming straight to you. And if you haven't sent in an Ask Video Mail question, what are you waiting for? It's the best way to get the most value for your subscription, and not only that, it's almost like getting a personal video if I answer your question. So send it in. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid. I'll be gentle when you send it in, okay? I promise. This question is a question that I get asked very frequently, actually. I've been asked this question like 4 or 5 times, and I've been holding off to answer it until I believe that I could concisely explain what the mindset should be. You know, I'm like the workflow maniac, so I always try to think of things from that approach, and I finally think I have an answer that I am happy with for this question. So I decide I'm going to just answer it in this video mail. Okay, so why don't we check out the question for this week? Thank you for the great question. As I'm sure you now realize, this is a kind of a contentious topic. It's not the same as something that is an artistic approach, or it's something that you could kind of assign an artistic approach to, like, I don't know, keying straight ahead rather than pose to pose for an acting shot. It's like, oh, well, that person has a lot of experience doing it that way. Why not, you know, just let them continue doing it that way? I can imagine that. And a lot of other things, I'm sure you could assign an artistic thing. This is kind of a little bit more technical. The question, at least for me, at its core, is: are we trying to emulate a 2D process? Or should we even try to emulate a 2D process or a handmade process, be it 2D cell animation or stop motion? So I thought I'd start with an anecdote. A lot of the guys that were down at Weta, I remember when I was at R&H, a lot of them came back from working on the Lord of the Rings trilogy and worked at places like Sony and the like. And I heard stories that they were all old stop motion animators, and that their work was looking very, very choppy, very jittery right up until it was done. So what they were doing was they were kind of keying either like stepped and on twos until it was time to polish, and then they were taking it down to ones and then making their final tweaks and adjustments and watching it over and over and over and making it perfectly smooth. Well, as a workflow, that is very difficult to fit into a production. So the second part of this question asks, is this done in a production setting? And what I would caution you, if this is the way that you've decided you like to work, is in a very an emulation of like stop motion animation or cell animation by just taking like one image after another. I would just caution you that there is going to be a little bit of breaking of that needs to occur in order for people to critique your animation. It's actually very hard. Even very experienced animators and animation directors and supervisors are going to have difficulty interpolating that stepped or choppy animation that you're working on. Indeed, I heard stories coming out of the industry that even the animation mentor method, working in stepped mode, was not disruptive per se, but a little bit of a challenge for a little while. And certainly not today, but just a little bit of a challenge for supervisors to deal with, because I certainly never worked that way. And if I had an animation mentor graduate who I hired based on their demo reel, meaning I hadn't seen their process, it was difficult for me in the first couple semesters of Animation Mentor to watch stepped animation. So going back to the question here a little bit, is it a should we be inherently relying on the interpolation of the software? Well, here's another little thing that I like to say. I like to pretend, I tell this to my students at Animation Mentor, I like to pretend that Maya is an in-betweener in the old definition of the word, meaning like you're working at a studio, you're working at Disney, you're an animator, you're a keyframe animator, and there are people who take your keyframes, who take your 25, 30 drawings and make an entire scene out of it. Because you have all of your timing cues and everything written out on the corner of the page and your key poses, and then they in between based on all of that. It's the way it used to work. You'd have an in-betweener working on your shots. Okay? So I kind of consider Maya an in-betweener, but a really, really stupid one. So imagine we're given, when we are working as 3D animators, we're given a person working for us who really is bad at their job. If you think about it that way, what you start realizing is that you need to be a lot more intense and kind of micromanage the way that Maya, let's just call this stupid in-betweener M, so that we can kind of build our little imagination about this scenario a little bit. You need to be writing M all day, because you know when M comes to your desk and picks up your stack of keyframes that you've drawn, you need to go, oh, wait, listen, you are in between. You're not paying attention to anything that I'm indicating here. I really want like a nice slow in here. I want you to anticipate and then fast out right here, like all these things. Are you going to do it linearly like you always do? Is it going to look like a robot M? And M's going to go, no, it's not. Okay, bye. And then he's going to disappear. And then a few minutes later, he's going to come back and show you all his drawings. And you're going to go, M, you jerk. You ruined it again. All right, so consider Maya this in-betweener that works for you that's really bad at his job. If you think about it that way, what starts to happen is you are foolproofing your work. So when we, for instance, I've given time and time again the piece of advice to when you spline your animation, let's say you start in stepped, and you spline your animation. I gave this piece of advice in the workflow walkthrough that I did early 2011. I gave this in the snappy dialogue shot. I say this over and over and over again, which is when you go from step to spline, if that moment when you spline it, your work has been destroyed, that's a really clear indicator to you that what happened was that you did not give M enough information to not screw anything up. Okay? So, Kelvin, the point here is if you give Maya a key on every other frame, so if you basically put everything on 2s even before you spline it, yes, you're not getting that those long curves in the graph editor for free. So you're not able to take advantage of really any interpolation type if you do that. But on the other hand, you know when you send this Dumbo out to go, in between your scene, he's going to come back with something that looks pretty much like what you want. The trade-off is that your work can be very chattery and kind of bumpy and stuttery up until kind of a little bit of a late stage for production purposes. So there's a balance. And so to wrap this question up, what I would say is this, is that you need to key very tightly. So a key on every other frame, so on 2s, 4's maximum of high action, high movement, contact, physical work, and action. Okay? And I like to key those things basically straight ahead. So a character, turns a corner and then vaults over a wall, like parkour style, with their hands pushing themselves over the wall. I would probably key that on 2s straight ahead and then just Alt V, watch it over and over and over again to check my timing and spacing and staging of that action. But definitely on 2s, at least on 2s, and even in blocking, probably there's a couple keys, full body keys on 1s for that action. Why? Because I know that he needs to hit some certain milestones. The hands have to be up and then touching. The spine has to be behind the wall and then curled up to get the legs over the wall. The legs need to be behind and then they need to be in front. The hands need to be touching, and then when the legs go in front, the hands need to come up so that he can propel forward off of the wall. And then there's a keyframe where he's in air. So I probably build all those poses, and it would turn out, depending on the speed of this vault action, it would probably be on 1s and 2s, even in blocking. Okay? You'll notice in the workflow walkthrough when I did the flour sack, the sort of jump in the air, the cartoony kind of thing, there was a lot of work on 1s and 2s, even in blocking, especially when he twinkled his toes like this and splatted, especially on the splat, full body keys on 1s and 2s. All right? So high action, high detail, physical work, contact, those kinds of things, definitely, even in blocking, on 1s and 2s, because you can't afford for the inaccuracy or the ineptitude of this jerk, this idiot that works at the side of your desk named Maya, who's going to in between your stuff horribly. On the other hand, there are some things that you just really can take such wonderful advantage of, like the trick that I do when I'm making a quick moving hold. For instance, you have a pose, the guy hits the pose, and then you just, let's say you need a 50 frame hold, okay? Then you go, let's say you stopped on frame 10, and then, frame 60 would be the end of that 50 frame hold, right? So on frame 60, you copy the pose, and then you edit it so that the big muscles are all relaxed more than the small muscles. So you wouldn't uncurl the fist, because that's easy to hold because it's all small muscles. But it's kind of hard to hold your arms up for too long. So you relax the shoulders, a little bit of the elbows, maybe a little bit of the wrists, keep the fists where they are, maybe a little bit in the spine, and then you build this pose. Now this to this is way too much of a moving hold, way too much. But then I take advantage of how Maya interpolates those keyframes naturally for me by going to frame 13, let's say, 3 frames after I've hit that pose, selecting all of my controls, middle mouse dragging out to frame 60, and then hitting S to set key. So what that did was that 3 frames out of 50 is 6%. So that gave me 6% of that movement that I actually keyframed. And it normally requires just a little bit of tweaking, but all of a sudden what you get is the guy hits the pose, and then you just have that nice, really subtle moving hold, full body. Everything looks like it's actually moving naturally. Why? Because our eye can pick up that the big muscles are actually moving a little bit, just a hair more than the little muscles. Okay, so that's a moment when you definitely want to rely on Maya's interpolation. Okay, so that means the opposite of what I said is you want to keys on ones and twos, and don't leave anything for Maya to screw up, like that physical stuff, that contact, high detail, high movement work. The opposite is true for things that you that it would be impossible over the length of time to get really, really smooth if you were keying on ones and twos. Can you imagine keying a 50 frame hold, moving hold, on ones and twos? It would like jiggle and it would be a disaster, right? So low movement, subtlety, moving holds, and non-physical kind of, meaning like it's not contacting anything, it's not brushing up against, it's not leaning against anything, nothing like that. Characters doing acting. Right, so you have the fast, physical, high detail contact, that area, and then you have the acting, where you really ought to see as long as you can stretch it out, as long as those arcs can be, and relying on using the fact that Maya can actually literally draw a perfect curve in space, and your eyeball definitely can't. Okay? Even if you have a light box, if you're doing cell animation, even if you have a light box, you need to see like 8-10 frames in order to get that curve perfect, right? If you have a light box and you only see the frame after and the frame before, if you're drawing it, I'm not sure if you use plastic animation paper, but that would be a good example. But even if you can only see the frame before and the frame after, and you try to make a dot go in a perfect circle, you can't do it. Literally nobody can do it. You need to see a ton of frames just to make sure that curve is rounding out. So apply that in your mind to what we're doing here in Maya, and there you go. If you need those broad gestures, if you need those sort of like acting type gestures, then it's really advantageous to rely on the way that Maya interpolates, and then add breakdowns later to correct those things. Last thing I'll say is that there is a danger when you're using stepped mode and knowing that you're going to later on rely on the way that Maya interpolates to give you those smooth, sort of like machine quality curves. Okay, and what that is that the stepped key will fall off when you spline it. It'll turn into basically just a spline interpolation to the next key. If this stepped key was supposed to represent the beginning of a moving hold, then I highly recommend you create a copied pair, which is just basically another way of saying you create a copy of that keyframe full body as long as the moving hold is. Then when you spline it, you have that moving hold. It won't be moving at all, but at least your timing won't be destroyed when you go to spline. So my last piece of advice is when you're using this, remember that stepped keys, you need to define in your head, what does that stepped key represent? Is it the beginning of the transition? Is it the end of the movement? Is it the middle of the moving hold? Or is it the end of the moving hold? Like, what does that step key actually represent for the timing and the hold of that pose? Okay. Thank you for asking that question. I hope I was concise enough. I see that this actually is going on a little long now, but it is a really great question, and I want you all to be thinking about workflow and how your choices in terms of what you're letting Maya, take off your desk and say, "Hey-yo, I'll see you later," and then come back, is affecting your work. How are you managing this employee of yours that is destined to screw things up? Are you actually utilizing the skills that Maya can offer, or are you kind of doing it all willy-nilly? You know which one I like, okay? Thank you for the question again. Please send in more questions. The address to send the questions to is webmaster@kennyroy.com. Please send one in if you haven't already. Don't forget to tell your friends about the site. There's always going to be referral bonuses. All they have to do is put in your exact username on the sign up page when they sign up for the site, and you are instantly and automatically credited with free time for every single member that you refer. So tell your friends, and there's no obligation. Okay? Thanks a lot. Happy New Year. Keep rocking with your animation, and as always, rock 'em.